In this video article, we're going to look at 3 simple major triad variations that you can pick up and add to your bassline vocabulary today and be using in jams the next time you're jamming with your bandmates. Before we get started, my name is Paul Wolf. If you've not encountered me before, you can find me at howtoplaybassdotcom or on Amazon. This is a screenshot of my Amazon author page. You can see some of the books that I've got up there. So for someone who's never encountered me before, my recommendation is go and check out How to Play Bass Learning from Jamerson Volume 1 with my name on it as the author, Paul Wolf, and read some of the reviews, and you'll get an idea of what students like you get from my books and from my teaching. Okay, in this video we're going to look at 3 simple major triad variations that you can use in your bass lines today. Two of them you may already use, but one of them I'm pretty sure you won't use. There's also a 4th one, like a secret one, that's derived by applying Billy Sheehan's nth degree concept to the 3rd variation that we're going to look at. And all of these variations apply to minor triads too. So you can take these, if you're playing on minor chords, minor blues, whatever the progression is, you can use all of these variations. All you need to remember to do is make the major thirds be minor thirds, and all of these devices will work in minor chords too. So you're getting double the bang for your buck. And one of the great things about learning these items, or the ones that you like the sound of, is that if you already know how to play the major triad, which anyone who doesn't I'll be surprised at, these will be so simple to pick up, because in one case it involves adding a different note. In another case it involves taking the same notes but changing the order of them up, and in the 3rd case it involves using the same notes but playing one of those notes an octave below. So you'll see all this in a moment. We'll go through it. There's video examples as well as notation and tabs so you can see it, but all of these are really simple to add, and you can literally add all of these to your vocabulary today. So let's just start with the major triad. It's one of the most basic devices in the bass player's vocabulary. In my codification system of devices that bass players commonly use, it's device 5. The minor triad is device 6. And the most common version of the major triad, which I'd be utterly dumbfounded if you weren't familiar with, is this one, where it's basically the R-3-5-3, and you most commonly use it going from C to an F chord, or C chord to an F chord. The one thing to point out, although this is really basic and I'm sure you already know, what's nice about this resolution using R-3-5-3 from C to F is you get what's known as an indirect resolution formed by the G and the E. So the G is the upper scalar approach to F, and if you were playing something, let's say you played root-3-5 and then played to F, the ear would go, yeah, that's cool, because G is the upper scalar approach to F, and that would sound natural, and the F would sound logical. But because you drop to the E, which is the lower chromatic approach to F, that just breaks up what the ear is expecting to hear. But E is a consonant note in the key of C, of course, because it's the 3rd, and it's the lower chromatic approach to F. So that resolution, that indirect resolution, works really nicely. There's 2 notes. In classical music terminology, they would be called an enclosure. I prefer Ed Friedland's terminology from Building Walking Bass Lines. He calls it an indirect resolution. So it forms an upper scalar, lower chromatic indirect resolution. And you'll see here that there's 2 ways that I'm going to play this. One, the first 2 bars is going to be played in quarter notes, and then in the second 2 bars it's going to be played in 8th notes, but each device note gets 2 8th notes. So we're simply using rhythmic replacement to replace each quarter note with 2 notes of the same pitch. So the device is still being spelled out in quarter notes, but in bar 3 we're getting an 8th note execution by using 2 8th notes per quarter note. This is what it sounds like, so you can just hear it. I'm sure you're familiar with it. So that's a really basic sound. I'm sure you're familiar with it. So let's just quickly talk about the two chord usages that you can use the R-3-5-3 Major Triad with. Obviously it works with chord movements from C to F or C7 to F7. The minor versions would work for C minor to F or C minor to F minor. It also works for the chord movement of C to E minor. The E on beat 4 would act as an octave approach. So you'd have to drop down an octave and play the root note of E minor an octave below, or depending on where you were playing this, you might be able to get up to the to make it a lower octave approach and play E minor an octave above that. It also works for the chord progression of C to E flat. You might think E flat's an unusual chord to be connected to C with, and it kind of is, but it's used in a lot of kind of 60s rock tunes, and the E flat is a chord that's borrowed from the parallel C minor harmony. That could be an entire lesson on its own, but if you type those words into Google or wherever, so C, E flat, parallel harmony, borrowed chords, you'll get some kind of results that will help explain that if you need to understand the theory of that. And in this instance, the E on beat 4 would act, I've written an upper scalar approach, it's an upper chromatic approach to the E flat chord. For this video though, we're sticking with the C to F chord movement for all the examples, though I will mention there are, especially on one of them, there are some other chord usages that the change in the the major triad note order allows you to approach other chords using that variation. We'll get to that in a minute. So let's look at major triad variation 1 first. Now this is something that I first saw in Paul McCartney's bass playing, and what he does is he plays root 3-5 and then he goes back to the root, and this works for C to F because he goes back to the root, which is obviously C, or the root of the C chord, and that's a dominant approach note to the F, and that can be either a lower dominant approach or an upper dominant approach. The example I'm going to show you in a moment, we're going to go up to the root of F, so it will be working as a lower dominant approach. This is also a great device for any chord movement where the next chord is a semitone or a tone above or below C. So if you played on C, root 3-5 root, so you're getting back to the C, that could be used to approach if the next chord was D or D minor, or if the next chord was a D flat chord, or if the next chord was a B flat chord, or even if the next chord was a B major chord. And in diatonic harmony you get these chord movements in different progressions, so it wouldn't necessarily be C. So although we're using everything from C to F and talking about it in the key of C, it works in all 12 keys, and it also in this instance, so let's say you were playing in C and you had a chord progression where it went from F to G, you could use the root 3-5 root device on the F to approach the G. So this works for across all 12 keys and in different parts of chord structures, depending on what chord progressions you're playing on. And in all of those that we've just talked about, where C works for B flat or B, or D flat / C sharp or D, the root of C acts as either a scalar or a chromatic approach. So that's what this one looks like, and again what we've got is first two bars are strictly quarter notes, and then bar 3 we've got an eighth note rhythmic variation where the eighth notes are created simply by substituting 2 eighth notes of the same pitch for every quarter note device note. So let's have a listen to how this example sounds. So remember, that could also work for going down to the low F, because the C in that instance would act as an upper dominant approach note. Okay, let's move on to major triad variation 2. I first really noticed and codified this in Tommy Shannon's bass playing. He uses it on Pride and Joy with Stevie Ray Vaughan. Obviously that's a swing eighth note application, but devices are applicable across different rhythmic feels. So we're going to use it in a straight eighth note example, and all of the examples in this video are in straight eighth notes. They all work with swing eighth notes. So if you want to use them in your blues rock, blues playing, or if you're playing on any 60s classic kind of swing eighth note or tunes with a swing eighth note feel, or even 12/8 tunes, all of these devices will work. You just need to adapt them rhythmically. And this is played root 3-5 CH. Now CH stands for chromatic, and here it represents the chromatic note between the fifth of C, which obviously is G if you know your triads and the note names, and the root of F. So the note that it will be is G flat, and you can see that here on beat 4 of bar 1 and bar 3. And again, we've got quarter note application in bar 1, and then the quarter notes are replaced with 2 eighth notes of the same pitch in bar 3. And don't forget, as I just mentioned, all of these ideas work with swing eighth note bass lines too. So let's have a listen to how the root 3-5 chromatic sounds. So, two things just to point out before we move on to the third example. The chromatic note does create harmonic tension, but that tension's resolved when the bass line gets or lands on the F on the downbeat of the next chord. So if you're thinking, if you're in a playing scenario where that dissonant note on beat 4 might upset the singer or someone else in the band, then keep this variation tucked away for other playing scenarios. But another thing that you can do is, if you know about modifying devices and you use this device on the eighth note version, if you played C, C, E, C, G, C, G flat, C, and then landed on the F, using what's called the modifying device of the going back to the root on the offbeats, will add more harmonic movement into your line and will disguise the fact that you're using essentially a simple major triad, but also because you're going back to the root note, the dissonant note on beat 4, the G flat, will only last for an eighth note, so any dissonance it creates will vanish when you go back to the C and then when you land on the F as well. And using the C in that way on the offbeats creates a really interesting effect. So I do recommend you try that out as well and see if you like the sound of that. Obviously don't overuse it like anything, but it can sound really cool. And you can just use that effect just with the G and the G flat notes, just to minimize how much time you're spending on that dissonant note if that's maybe an issue for your bandmates or your singer. Okay, let's move on to Major Triad Variation 3. Now I first found this one in Jamerson's bass playing, and how he plays this is he plays the root note, then he goes down to the fifth, then he plays the root note again, and then he goes up to the third. So what's great about this is it uses the notes of the major triad, but it doesn't sound like a conventional major triad. So it's a really interesting way if you're in a playing scenario and you want to use something that's conventional, or you want to use an easy device while you're thinking of playing something more sophisticated. You can use this as a way to play, I call them safety devices when you're playing spontaneously. So it can work as a safety device, but it doesn't make your bass line sound conventional because it's not the conventional way that a major triad is played. So this is what it looks like in notation. So you can see there the root goes down to the fifth, back to the root, and you get that nice bounce from the fifth because that's the lower dominant approach to C, and then you go up to E before you land on F. And again, that's duplicated in bar 3 but with an eighth note rhythm. So let's have a listen to how Jamerson's variation of the major triad sounds. So, although that sounds really consonant, it doesn't sound like the kind of linear-y, arpeggio-y way that most R-3-5-3 kind of lines do sound. So that's partly why I like it. Try it out, see what you think. Now, the last variation we're going to look at, this is the secret variation that I alluded to at the start of the video. I've called the nth degree variation. On one of his DVDs, Billy Sheehan talks about how his idiosyncratic playing style came about. And if you've never seen Billy Sheehan playing, do check him out, because he's has a very unusual approach to his rock bass lines. And with Billy Sheehan, the reason or the way that his playing style developed was because he used this concept of taking it to the nth degree. And what that means is every idea he found that he liked, he'd see how many possible different playing settings he could use it in. So he'd try it with, depending on what it was, he'd try it on different strings, different scales, different chordal contexts, and so on. And it's a really great way to expand your vocabulary. The previous variation is unusual and few players use it, so I thought let's try taking it to the nth degree. And what's interesting is no one uses the inversion of the previous idea. So what I've done is I've just swapped the third and the fifth around. So in this variation, from the root note we go up to the third, then back to the root note, and then down to the fifth. And because we're playing the fifth an octave below, I've dropped the octave of the root note of F, and that's now played at the first fret of the E string. And again in bar 3 we've just simply replaced each quarter note device note with 2 eighth notes. So here's what the nth note degree variation sounds like. Now, as I've mentioned in previous videos, I've analysed somewhere in the region of 1,500 to 2,000 songs, and I don't ever remember seeing anyone use that. So if you like the sound and feel of that, how it lays out under your fingers, that could be another way that you could get from C down to low F, or obviously the equivalent chord progression if you're in a different key. And what it does is it has a decent amount of vertical movement in the bass line, and it's consonant because it uses major triad notes, but it doesn't sound like a major triad. So that might be something you want to add to your vocabulary. So closing out, although the major triad is a basic device in the bass vocabulary, you can use it in multiple ways to vary your lines and your sound up, and I've shown you 4 in this video. All 3 of the main variations today sound great and have their uses, and the Jamerson variation is my favourite of the 3. And all of these ideas will work for minor chords. But remember, you have to swap out the major 3 and replace it with a minor 3 to make it work. So try some of those out, see which ones you like. Let me know in the comments which ones you already know, which ones you find useful. If you want to build on these ideas, learn more devices from the vocabulary of the bass guitar, I've picked 4 of my books which might make a good starting point for you. So if you're a beginner, the one at the bottom, How to Play Bass Guitar in 50 Songs, that's a 5-module series. That would be a good place to start. We don't really start getting into devices until module 2, so if you can already play, then maybe you might want to start from module 2. The other ones, basically which one you'd pick of those would depend on whether Jamerson, Paul McCartney, or blues rock stroke Tommy Shannon style of bass playing takes your fancy. Whichever one of those, there's an appropriate book that you can start from. And then finally, thank you for spending time with me today with this video. I'll catch you in the next video, and here are some recommended videos from my channel.